Have you thought about water lately? Well, water is really, really important because everything that is alive needs water. And I am trying to support a lot of life to grow here in my backyard. And for us here at the bottom of the world in the southern hemisphere, we've hit summertime and water becomes super, super important. So today I want to show you how I set up my watering systems for the chickens and for the gardens to get the absolute most that I can out of every drop. My water strategy starts in the winter time. So for me, my growing season, sort of the end of the year and the beginning of the new year, happens in the winter, which of course is where it's supposed to happen, and it happens for my northern hemisphere viewers. But for us here in the southern hemisphere, the official calendar end of the year is the middle of summer. So that gets a little awkward, but winter is the time I start thinking about water for the year. And I start thinking about how can I maximize every drop of water that falls as rain, because we get quite a bit of rain in the wintertime, not so much in the summertime. So what I am trying to do is I am trying to slow down the water from leaving the property. I'm trying to give it time to sit and sink into my soil. I don't want it coming into puddles or making mud. I want to have systems in place that hold the water and let it go slowly into the ground. So what I do is I use ground cover, plants growing everywhere as much as possible, even in the wintertime. I use bark chip mulch on my pathways and empty spaces and in the chicken run. And all of those things help to distribute the rainfall, slow it down, and let it go into the soil nice and slowly so the ground has the opportunity to take it up and hold it. Now, I'm really lucky here. I have a beautiful, loamy topsoil that goes down into clay, and clay likes to hold on to water. So if I can get the water through the topsoil, I can keep it nice and slow, moving down into the layers. It can hit the clay and be held there. So it's sort of making a nice little reservoir of water for me to utilize, to draw on in the summertime. Well, not me, the plants I'm trying to support to grow. So that's the beginning of my strategy, is to get the water into the ground, get it to stay in the ground so that I can use it when the rain starts to dry up. One thing I have added in this year to catch some of the springtime rains are some IBC totes that I have hooked up to the drain pipes of the house to catch rainwater so I can use it later in the garden. Well, they fill up a lot faster than I expected, so I have let some water out of them multiple times, but that's just adding to the water that is in the soil to be used. So that's not a big deal, but that's a great cheap solution to capture some water to use on your garden. But what am I actually doing when I've got plants in the ground and they need water? And I've got raised garden beds, so they're going to be a little drier than plants that are growing directly in the ground. Well, I have a few strategies. One strategy I like to use is using these olla pots. So what this is a unglazed clay. Well, you can see this is what it looks like. You bury that in the ground up to the neck, and it has a little lid, and that just stops any critters and so on and so forth going inside. You fill it up, and the water can come out of the clay. So the dry soil coming up against the clay will draw the water out. So it's porous. And I find these fantastic, but they don't do a large area. So this is a pretty big one. I like to bury these in my gardens, but they're sort of a backup for my drip irrigation system. So my drip irrigation system is not a true drip irrigation system. It's a leaky hose system, or I think they're called weeper hoses. So what they are, and it's going to be a bit tricky to see because I've got them already out on the garden, so we're just going to have to make do. But it's just a regular garden hose fixture. Just click on, and it goes into a hose, which just looks like a regular hose, but it's porous. And these are actually made out of recycled car tires. So that's pretty cool. reuse, recycle, etc., etc. And instead of having little specific drips coming down like a system with a dripper and all the rest of it, it just weeps along the entire length of the hose. Water just weeps out of the pores of the hose. And I find that fantastic. It works really, really well. The water doesn't evaporate quickly. They can go underneath a mulch layer. Garden hose just clicks on. So it's really easy. They're not very expensive. I can roll them up in the wintertime, in the off season, put them back out, move them around. I leave them in there permanent, well, not permanently, but for the whole growing season. But you could feasibly take them to different places and use that to irrigate. So highly recommend that. That's my main way of getting water into the gardens. It saves a lot of water compared to hand watering with a hose, which isn't very efficient for water use. And it also saves time because I have them hooked up to just a basic manual dial timer for 2 hours. I turn it on, I walk away. I know they're getting their water. Another strategy I like to use is using shade to reduce how much the sun is pounding down on the garden and stressing the plants out, making them need to use more water. So that's one of the functions that the borders that I grow around the outsides of my garden beds serve, is to provide shade for the plants on the inside. And together it just works really well. And also keeping the soil covered all the time. So that's either with living plants growing, so there's not patches of bare soil, or it's with mulch or chopping and dropping weeds, things like that. Keeping the soil covered at all times is really going to slow down evaporation out of the soil and help to keep the soil temperature just a bit more stable rather than it getting really, really hot during the sunny days. And in New Zealand, the sun is intense. So I try to get shade onto my plants. They really do need it. 8 hours of strong sunlight here is a lot for plants. And if they're getting even more than that, they really start to suffer. So shade is your friend, absolutely, in terms of making water go the extra distance. The chicken flock drink a lot of water when it gets hot. And I have a couple of different really basic watering systems I use for them. One is just a manual fill and then flip chicken watering system, and they can just drink from the lip around that, and I keep an eye on that. At the moment it needs filling like every second day, so I've sort of got to be on that, but at least it keeps it nice and fresh in this hot weather. The other thing they really like is I just have a pot, an old enamel pot filled up with water, and they're really into it. It's actually their favorite thing to drink out of, and I just keep it full and they love it. I kind of didn't expect them to enjoy it so much because it's got a little bit of rust in it and stuff, but they seem to think that the water out of that tastes pretty awesome and they're very into it. Now, I'm using that. This is the first time I'm using that in the summertime because normally I have chicks. And what you absolutely don't want to have if you have baby chicks is a large open water source because they can fall in and drown, which would be very bad and sad. But this year I haven't got any chicks. I'm taking a little break from hatching and rearing chicks this season. So they've got their big pot full of water. The adult chickens are fine with it and they're really, really enjoying it. But another facet of managing the chicken flock with water is how dry or wet their run gets. And using the composting chicken run is a really, really great way of just sort of keeping that at a medium point. It takes a lot longer for that deep composting mulch to dry out in the summertime, and it essentially doesn't get wet in the wintertime. And it is serving that same purpose as I talked about at the beginning of this video of slowing and holding the water so it can absorb slowly into the ground. So the trees I have growing in the chicken run are just so happy with that system because they have moisture available to them for much longer than if they didn't have a thick layer of mulch holding that moisture in for them and helping to make the temperature a little bit more moderated than going really hot or really cold. So composting chicken run, super great way to manage water, whether you have too much of it or not enough of it. The most important thing to understand about water in your landscape is understanding that you want to keep it in the soil or store it if you can't keep it in the soil enough. And that is what my system is all about. Slowing the water down, letting it absorb into the ground, and then using strategies like the olla pot and my drip system, which I try and have underneath mulch, to when it is hot to reduce the evaporation. So I'm not wasting water by flinging it out onto the soil surface. It is going where it needs to go, and it's going underground as quickly as possible. So you can be really efficient with it. You can make the absolute most out of what you have, because the climate is getting kind of all over the place and you just don't know year on year what you're going to get. So plan ahead and capture all that water you can to use the best way possible. And then you're going to have what you need when you need it to grow great plants and keep your animals happy and everything else that you need to get done.